All right, everyone. Welcome back to the PLAP Local Podcast. I am your host, Ryan Espey. Please take the time to hit like on this video and subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you're notified whenever new content drops. Today is a very special day. We have Jeff Palmer from Urban Systems joining us and Evo Leary joining us as well from Fred. And we are going to talk about all things regarding the Portage la Prairie housing strategy. Now, we're not going to present the strategy again. That was done at council some time ago, but I will put a link to that video in the description of this video. So if you're interested in going back and watching that, please do so. Otherwise, let's go. All right, everybody, welcome. I am joined by Jeff Palmer of Urban Systems and Evo Leary of Pred. How are you both doing today?
Very good, thanks.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Well, the subject matter for this morning is the Portage la Prairie housing strategy, which was recently done and presented to council. And if you want to see the actual digital presentation of that happened at council, I will link that video in the video description of this one. So check down below for that. But we're here to talk about, first of all, how this came to be, the process, and all the high-level details that we can get into. So Jeff, would you like to start? I mean, or possibly Eve, how did we come to initiate the Portage la Prairie housing strategy?
Well, I can just speak for Pred, Ryan, but we were approached by the city and PCRC to be a partner organization. Portage la Prairie is seeing an unprecedented amount of growth in our community, and socioeconomics such as housing and focusing on the future is definitely something our council is very leaning towards for ensuring that we're taking a proactive approach. So maybe I'll hand it over then to Jeff, who can kind of speak to the projects and kind of how it got kicked off. But yeah, from a partner organization, really, really excited that we're here with this final document.
Sure, thanks, Eve. Yeah, thanks, Ryan. As you mentioned, I'm a planner with Urban Systems, and I'm a city planner by background, and we work with a lot of municipalities across Manitoba and Northwestern Ontario. Housing studies are one thing we do because housing, as Eve mentioned, is an important economic driver. It's important. Everybody deserves a place to live, a roof over their heads. But what we're also finding now is that there is so much demand for housing, the costs are going up, that communities aren't able to fulfill economic development opportunities if they don't have enough housing. There's lots of jobs out there, but if people can't find housing, good quality, affordable housing to live in, they won't move to those communities. So it's holding some communities back. So that was part of the study, the terms of reference. I think a number of municipalities across Manitoba were kind of looking at housing opportunities at the same time. There were some research dollars available, and Portage had some key questions. Some of them were what barriers exist that are preventing people from accessing appropriate housing, and why is that? How does Portage compare to other communities of a similar size? What's the similarities and differences in the housing market? Why does Portage have more renters? A lot of it is kind of knowing where you are compared to other municipalities in the province, just for sake of comparison. How affordable is affordable housing, and what innovative solutions could be suggested, including policy or bylaw changes. So what we sort of found was we compared Portage to Winkler, Steinbach, Selkirk, and you're pretty much in the middle of the pack in terms of there weren't any huge differences. So if you've heard anecdotally, like we have way more rentals or we have hardly any rentals, you're actually remarkably close to what we found in other communities of the same size. Income was in the middle of the road. Affordability was in the middle of the road. Apartments we found were a little bit higher because you have a lot of new construction of apartments, and new construction is always a little bit more expensive. So you're kind of just catching up there. On the plus side is you have a lot of apartments for people to move into. They are a little bit more expensive, but that will come down over time. And it does mean that you have a good housing stock, good supply of good quality apartments. So that's important too. So that was just part of the study. Some of the findings that we felt, or some of the part of the project was to talk about what can the city do to help encourage housing, because usually we rely on the province or the federal government Usually the feds will throw some dollars into a housing fund, and it'll be up to the provincial agency to disperse it, Manitoba Housing in this case. So we looked at different, but not so much the municipality, because municipalities have less resources available to deal with a project like housing. So we came up with a number of solutions. One of them is making sure there's an inclusionary housing policy in your zoning bylaw. The city zoning bylaw is something that you can control, the municipality can control, and it just requires that you have, for example, some affordable housing units in a particular development. You can make that happen more easily by if the city has land that they can contribute to a project, or you can sell it below market. Usually the largest landlords in the city, property owners, is the city itself. And you're possibly holding on to a lot of land that is sitting idle or vacant. And maybe you could get that back on the tax rolls and get serviced. So often we'll work with the municipality to go through a process of identifying whether or not land is actually surplus or just happens to be sitting there from an accident of history. And if you do find some extra land, then selling it, maybe you sell it through a request for proposals, and maybe 10% of the units have to be meeting affordability criteria. That's one way that the city can act to get some more affordable housing units, and everybody wins. You make more tax revenues. There's more market and affordable housing units in the community. It's a win-win kind of situation. Sometimes it can be within a particular building, like maybe you're building a 36 unit walk-up, maybe 10% are affordable, 3 or 4 units. And, or you could give, some municipalities use what we call a density bonusing. Maybe your zoning only allows for 10 units on the site, but the city will allow for 12 if the other 2 are affordable. And that might last for 25 years. And then after that, they revert to market rent again. So there's all sorts of creative agreements that the city can use to increase affordability. And it makes sense to have projects, to have affordable units everywhere, not one part of your community where you have a development with 40 or 50 units, but to have those 40 or 50 units kind of sprinkled throughout your community. Those just seem to work better, and it's easier to build them over time as well.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about that? Because the argument that has come up, and I've heard this before, is that politicians shouldn't get involved with telling developers what to build. So what might you say to that particular comment that has come up from time to time?
Well, I think you know your community best, and you have to. Everybody has their own perspective and issues that they need to bring to the table. And developers, first and foremost, have to make sure that their bottom line needs are met. It doesn't mean that it has to be an adversarial relationship. There's ways that you can both work together to get more housing units and have a development that is a higher value. I think it's absolutely your responsibility, the city's responsibility, to put these issues forward. Otherwise, your entire community suffers. If you're not able to provide enough housing, where are people going to come to fill the jobs? And it's not just a matter of providing the land out there, because that will meet a certain part of the market needs, but it doesn't meet every need. So a good balanced development has housing for everybody, and everybody needs to bring something to the table. Housing developers need to give a little bit. The public sector needs to offer incentives or relax density and things like that. Everybody has a role to play. It's not strictly reliant on one part of the economy.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And I would just add, from an economic development point of view as well, Ryan, is, as the person that's in our community attracting these large scale industries, or speaking to our local businesses about expansion, housing is a conversation that comes up. So economic development and being there is first and foremost definitely a municipal responsibility. So we really need to be proactive. When developers come, we need to be able to provide them the data, benchmark the data, and really understand where our community is growing. So I hope that helps with that question.
It does, and I actually am pretty excited because I know what the recommendations are, but I'm not going to bury the lead on you. So let's continue.
Well, so that one of the other recommendations was to create an incentive policy. So that's just that's a process where you provide developers with incentives in exchange for public benefit. So maybe it's affordable housing or public space. We talked about density bonusing a little bit. And density bonusing you often hear as a tool in big cities like Vancouver, but it can be applied on a smaller scale too, right? Like I was talking about a 10-unit development might become 12 units, for example, and that will have no impact on the livability of a neighborhood, but it does help to bring in some extra revenue that can be used to do other things. And more people living more efficiently on a smaller piece of land is good economics as well. So that's one opportunity. We also talked about exploring partnerships with Indigenous governments. That could be in the case of maybe there's lands that the First Nation owns or that the city owns, that there could be some sort of partnership development on. It could be affordable housing, but it doesn't have to be affordable housing. We do a lot of work in British Columbia where lands are owned by First Nations and developed by private developers, and they're on a lease arrangement. So there's multiple public policy goals that could be achieved there, but you have to start with the conversations, and maybe those conversations are happening. I'm not sure, but I haven't really seen a lot of activity yet. We've seen some First Nations with urban lands where they're developing economic development initiatives that seem to be revolving around retail or office or commercial uses, not housing so much. And that's an opportunity because, as we all know, there's huge demand for housing. So those are some conversations that I hope are happening.
That's a fascinating option, actually. I have not, until I had heard this, I had not even considered the lease option, just because it's never been a topic of conversation and I never thought of it.
One of my first jobs at a university was working at the Forks, and they are building housing there now. I'm not sure if the housing is on leased land. I assume it is because everything else is. All the buildings at the Forks are on long-term land leases, 75 or 99 years. Portage Place was built on a long-term land lease, so it absolutely can be done. It does affect the value, but that's something that is factored into the lease conversations at the outset. And a lease is kind of a nice way too, where you are able to have terms that everyone has to agree to for the long term, over the term of the lease. So it's not like you sell it and walk away and you're done with it and the responsibilities end. When you have a lease arrangement, both parties enter the lease and both parties have responsibilities that they have to fulfill. So that's a nice way of kind of keeping everybody in ongoing conversations about, is the project working? Does it need to be repositioned or retooled or anything like that? So it's very common, and quite a bit more common when we're working with First Nations in BC. But there's no reason why that can't happen here. And the first thing to do is just start having those conversations and just get people talking.
We do have one of those arrangements. We have Stride Place on a 99-year lease, and it has been criticized by a few people, that arrangement. But I mean, they're like, we're giving away our building in 100 years. Well, 100 years might be time to build a new one anyway.
That's the biggest challenge. Exactly, right? Like, how do you factor in the capital upgrades when you're approaching the last third of the lifespan of the lease and that sort of thing? So yeah. You're not you're not giving away the farm by any stretch. Everybody goes into it with their eyes open. So there's other ways you can provide incentives like tax increment financing. There's provincial legislation that allows the property taxes to be waived for a period of time. I recall when I worked at Center Venture in downtown Winnipeg, we would forgive property taxes, including school taxes, for roughly 10 years per unit. So, if an average unit is paying $5,000 in tax per year combined, over 10 years, that's $50,000. A 20-unit building, that's $1 million. That's a significant incentive, and it's no money out of the treasury. It's tax deferment. So you can make the argument that the building otherwise, without the tax incentive program, wouldn't have proceeded otherwise. If it was going to happen anyway, then yes, it is money out. But you don't have these tax incentive programs if your development community is healthy. It's meant to address a gap in the market where you know that it won't proceed or hasn't proceeded to date unless you're able to offer this incentive. So it was a great program, and you're successful when the incentives are no longer required. And I think that's almost the case in downtown Winnipeg. Now I'm trying to think about 300 Main Street, which is apartments, it's rentals. And the first ones we found that we were funding were condominiums, people putting some equity in and waiting for the long-term benefit. But there weren't any institutional investors willing to invest in apartments at the beginning. And now they are. It took 25 years. So you have to be patient. And that's why it's important that a municipality or a development corporation or a PRED or whomever is part of the solution, because developers don't necessarily think about these long timelines. They have to take advantage of the market opportunity when it is and where it is, and don't necessarily think on long horizons. They can't. It's not how they're structured. But that's where a municipality or a development corporation can step in, because you do have to have those long horizons and be patient for the return to take place.
Mm-hmm.
We also talked about secondary suites and things like that. That's one way. So you've probably heard in the news in the last couple of weeks, there's a number of municipalities that are trying to get Housing Accelerator Fund money from the federal government. And the fund was intended to stimulate construction by removing barriers, by removing procedural barriers like zoning. So as a planner, this kind of rubs me the wrong way a little bit, because these are the rules that we work with municipalities to implement. But sometimes they're used ineffectively. And one of the goals of these funds is to, some municipalities are going to be allowing more units as a right on existing lots. Like, instead of single family homes, you're allowing duplexes or secondary suites. So secondary suites are one way that you can introduce a little bit of density into your neighborhood and provide more affordable suites, and also make the primary suite a little bit more affordable too, because you're bringing in some rent. So a secondary suite is limited in the size that it can be. It's usually around 500 to 700 square feet. It's often a proportion of the size of a larger unit. It can be within the house. It can be in your garage. Sometimes we call them granny flats, but anybody can live there. You can't restrict it to your family. So it has to be self-contained. It has to have, kitchen, washroom, bathroom, inspections, all those things. It's a fully self-contained unit, permitted unit, but then it's an extra unit on the market, and it uses city infrastructure more efficiently, and it provides another unit and some revenue for the property owner as well. So it's a win-win situation. It's really becoming more popular now to incorporate secondary suites into the planning process, because a lot of them exist already. They're just flying under the radar, and this is a way of legitimizing it, making sure that they're safe, and also that they're inspected, and also bringing some revenue in for property owners, and as well as some additional property taxes for the municipality as well, because there is a value to them.
I have seen so many of these secondary suites without my city council hat on, with my real estate hat on, of course.
Yeah.
You walk in and you see them, and they're not permitted, but they've been there forever. It's a problem that we need a solution for. Now, am I jumping too far ahead if I visited that recommendation of an R2 zoning on new development?
No, that's great. When the time comes for Portage to revisit your zoning bylaw, we've had really good experience working with other municipalities in Manitoba and their development community in establishing, right now most municipalities have an R1 zone, single family zone. We've changed that, and a lot of places across the country have too, to an R2 zone. So that allows a duplex. Now, the difference between a duplex and a secondary suite is a duplex is two primary suites of a typical size, say 1,500 square feet. A secondary suite is, by just the way it sounds, secondary to the primary suite, so it's smaller. But you can easily introduce secondary suites into an R1 zone. A lot of new developments, what people get uncomfortable about is when there's change and when there's uncertainty. But in new developments in particular, if you're zoning land R2 to allow for two family homes, duplexes, side by sides, one above the other, anything like that, if that happens from the outset, then then people's expectations are met. You know what the neighborhood's going to look like, what the opportunities might be, and I live in a neighborhood like that in Winnipeg, and it's helpful because it increases it provides more choice in housing forms that meet different people's needs. You can rent in my neighborhood, you can own, there's larger homes, there's smaller homes. Throughout your life cycle, there's properties that are going to meet my needs. So you don't, if you want to stay close because your kids or your grandkids are next door, or you want to downsize, you don't have to move to the other side of town. You can stay within your network, you can stay within your friends. You might be living across from your grandkids or that sort of thing. So R2 zones just help build a little bit more flexibility into the process, and developers like it, the public likes it. When you zone a property R2, it doesn't mean that it has to have a 2-unit development on it. It just means that it could. So it really depends on the market and the nature of the development. But I've seen next to no concern about it when it's developed at the outset. When you take an R1 neighborhood and rezone it to R2, that's more of a challenge. It can be done, and it brings more value to the properties, but that kind of change is usually more than people have bargained for. And it's a different kind of conversation that doesn't always go as well. But certainly when we would always suggest that when you're bringing new lands onto on stream, that you should consider zoning them R2 or whatever you want to call it to allow for a little bit of density.
Right. What else do we have here? We're talking about some construction stuff earlier before we went on the air. Are we there yet?
Sure. We were talking a little bit about modular housing versus typical construction methods. So normally when you build a single family house, you have different trades coming on site at different times, different subcontractors, some doing electrical, some doing framing, some doing plumbing, some doing roofing. When you build a modular home, it's a series of modules that are built in a factory. And those are not to be confused with like a mobile home or when you're building pieces in a factory like Lego, it doesn't mean that you're using all the same pieces. It just means that they can be built separately in a factory and then moved off-site for final assembly. So the house that went up across the street from me was built in a factory, but you'd never know it. It was a number of pieces that were put together on site and finished within a week. And the time to build it was 3 or 4 months instead of 10 or 12 months. So it was very quick. They were very happy with the quality of construction. And I mentioned it before because there's a few modular builders around the Portage area. And really the key components for modular builders are good access to labor, good access to materials, building materials, and good transportation routes. And you've got all those 3 things in Portage. I really think there's an opportunity there. There's lots of communities in northern Manitoba, northwestern Ontario, where there's a shortage of labor everywhere. Building material, the costs are through the roof. It's not a very competitive market. And even though transportation costs are a little bit higher to get there, it's more than offset by the savings of building it in a factory. So I think there's just some opportunities there that, Eve, that maybe you can explore with some of your members, or that we do. I think there's all sorts of growth opportunities. When I see what's happening, it's in Ontario and other markets with modular housing. It's through the roof. You can build multifamily with modular housing. You can build. I remember seeing a shelter for our homeless population. A supportive housing was built in the factory too. You can build the fanciest cottages on Lake of the Woods in a factory and crane them in, or not crane them in. I think it was a helicopter they were using to bring them in. So the type of construction doesn't dictate what the outcome is going to be. It's just a different way of building. I think there's all sorts of opportunities there, especially for the Portage region.
And then maybe, Jeff, then looking at maybe our zoning and what we can do as a municipality, like to maybe forward that recommendation. Like, how does our zoning bylaw and our process here, like, are we investment ready for modular housing, or is there work that needs to be done? Like, what's your recommendation for the ECDEV department to move forward with that then?
I think that you would just want to start by scanning the marketplace and seeing who's working there now, and there are companies that are active and seeing if there's ways to support them, because I don't see any downside to it. Honestly, I need to do a little bit of more work in this field, because modular housing hasn't taken off as much as I might have expected it to. And there must be a reason for that, because on paper, it appears to be cheaper, but maybe there's other factors that play into it. So I think it's definitely worthy of further study. Talking with the people who are doing it right now, trying to support them, building from within and building on the existing capacity. That's probably the first place to start. But yeah, I don't see any downside. There's a whole movement dedicated to modular housing, and it's something that I'm aware of, but not that familiar with. So it's we all should spend more time looking at it, because I think I just feel that there's opportunities there for Portage based on what I found. Even as a social enterprise, you might recall like a social enterprise is almost a sort of a nonprofit situation where people are building the skills. People who have had trouble entering the workforce might need an extra support to get back into the workforce. And pardon me, I recall a couple of years ago, there were programs where houses were being retrofitted to be more energy efficient. Geothermal programs were being established. These were all done through a social enterprise. A lot of building a home is very technical, specific work. A lot of it you can be trained on it fairly quickly. Maybe there's opportunities there to introduce a social enterprise and build homes in a factory and ship them all over the region. It seems like there's an opportunity there.
Good export business for sure.
Yeah, I find it so interesting that these ideas always, and I think as far as Portage goes, maybe it's a marketing problem, but these ideas always come full circle. So if you remember, and I've sold one of these houses, you used to be able to order a house out of the Eaton's catalog.
Yes.
And it would come to you in pieces, and you would put it together.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And I remember going to a presentation on innovative housing techniques, and they were doing the same thing. And I was thinking, like, my 100-year-old house was built with this technique. These guys were just ordering it through Home Depot, and they had a big Excel spreadsheet where you order your different pieces, and then it comes delivered on site from Home Depot. Like, what is innovative about that? Apparently it is. But anyway, I thought that was kind of fun. So there's one other thing that a municipality can do that's kind of important. And one thing we heard, not just through this study, but in other work we've done in Portage, is that transportation is a challenge. Getting people back and forth between where they live and where the jobs are is a huge challenge, especially for new Canadians. And partly because your business park is a little bit out of town, or one of the business parks is. But it's also a very good model of successful cooperation between the municipality, between Portage and the RM. So I like to plug that one whenever I get a chance with other municipalities who might not be getting along as well as you guys do. And not to pretend that there's no issues, but you make it work, right? It's a good example there. So one thing you can do with your zoning bylaw is to try and encourage mixed-use zoning. In the old days, 100 years ago, we would have housing over here and industry over here and commercial over here, because the industry would be toxic and it would negatively impact the health of the residents. That's not the case anymore. People want to live and work in close proximity. So to have these zones that exclude different types of uses or have large blocks of them in different places is not productive anymore. So when you're reconsidering adding, or when you're zoning new lands to bring them on stream as part of your development, keep in mind where your commercial areas are going to go. Try and allow a little bit of retail or commercial use as part of that supports the housing too. When you're retrofitting some of your existing neighborhoods, have the conversations about maybe on some arterial streets, can we allow more employment centers, whether that's office or commercial work or anything like that. All those are important, and it makes it easier. It's better in so many perspectives. It diversifies your tax base. It's better for people to be able to walk 5 minutes away there rather than have to get in their truck and drive. It's, I drive to the gym every second day, right? Why can't I build that kind of exercise into my daily routine? It's better for the planet. It's better for me, better for my pocketbook. At the end of the day, it's always better for your pocketbook, right? If we don't have to build all this extra infrastructure to service development that could be done more efficiently, then everybody wins. So that's my plug for planning, I guess, is that we're trying to save everybody a little bit of money by making sure that we spend money on infrastructure as efficiently as possible, because that's your roads, sewers, pipes, water, that's where the big costs emerge. And they never, by the time you pay for them the first time, it's time to reinvest in them the second time. So it's an ongoing expense. Just trying to use the land a little bit more wisely.
Mm-hmm. Do we have anything else we need to cover from that, from our housing strategy?
Well, a good consultant always recommends that further study is needed. So I haven't thought of anything off the top of my head, but I'll get back to you on that. It's important to just do this proactively, as you did. You didn't wait for a problem to arise. There's always funds that will become available that you can't foresee. And when you have these shovel-ready plans, they're not really shovel-ready, but you know what I mean. They're good to go, and they have identified the priorities in your community. You're way ahead of other municipalities that are still looking at each other, trying to figure out what the problems are and what the solutions might be. So it's always good to act proactively, as you've done with this case, and to revisit it every couple of years. This was based a lot on the 2021 census that came out at the end of 2022, the housing needs. So probably 5 years later, you should revisit it again, 4 years from now. And once you've done it the first time, it's not a huge undertaking to update it 5 years in the future. So it's also good to kind of keep on track, see where you've made some progress, see where you might have fallen behind a little bit, see how those other comparable communities in Manitoba are doing, and if you're keeping up or pulling ahead or how that's working. So that's the only thing in the short term. In the longer term, in the medium term, if you find that there's strategies here that need to be implemented. So, we're always happy to talk about that and see where the opportunities might be. If you're finding that you're not able to implement them, then we have to figure out a way to do that, whether there's no will on the political level or whether you need sort of a development agency that can help encourage that along. So we should, what we don't want to see is this report sitting on a shelf and nobody look at this. So it's good to kind of keep it top of mind. So that's why I appreciate the opportunity to come here today and talk about it a little bit more.
Yes, the true tragedy would be if we did this and then put it on a shelf and never acted on anything in it.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Eve, any parting thoughts?
No, just really appreciate it. Like, we're very excited. I know this is something that we need, and I know we're working on our regional economic development strategy, and we're doing a socioeconomic impact assessment. So we're very, very excited about taking this data and building it, and then making sure it's not sitting on the shelf anywhere. So just really appreciate your time and effort, Jeff, and your passion for the project.
Oh, thanks. It's fun to work with a client that working in Portage is always a lot of fun. It's good people caring about an interesting community. So yeah, always happy. I always make time for Portage.
Thanks, Jeff.
We appreciate it. Well, I'm going to link all of your information in the comments section of the video, or pardon me, in the video description, so that people can find both of you if they're so looking. And I thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Thanks again. Appreciate it.